Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is seize, and this is another suggestion from the viewer Luis, and I just want to say a special thank you for all of these great ideas. Now, let's take a moment and review some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear or see the verb seize used means to take hold suddenly and forcibly. So here we're really talking about either using our hands, maybe a tool, some kind of thing in order to grab and take hold of something. Related to that is the second definition, to take forcible possession of something, or another synonym you might hear is the word impound. When we use this second definition, it's very common to hear it used in connection to law enforcement. So you might think of police. So when they see, let's say, for example, drugs, right? They're going to take possession, right? Somebody just doesn't get to keep those. That's going to be held as evidence and maybe eventually used in a trial. But they are using the law essentially to take possession of it. Another way the verb seize gets used is in regard to taking an opportunity or maybe taking the initiative to do something rather eagerly and decisively. So, when people are offered the chance maybe to work on a new project, we might talk about seizing the opportunity to develop new skills. A fourth way seize gets used is to affect someone suddenly or acutely with a feeling or a pain. As I thought about this fourth definition, I feel like I have seen it used more commonly in literature. So, a particular writer is describing maybe something surprising, shocking, that causes another character to feel something very strongly. Many times I've seen that verb used to kind of describe that, kind of being seized with grief, might be an example. A fifth way seize gets used means to strongly appeal to or attract someone's imagination or their attention. So, again, you're kind of this is more of a metaphor, we might say. But if you think of that first definition of suddenly taking hold of something, here it's sort of like our mind is taking hold of. It's caught making us really pay attention to something, or it's maybe stimulating our imagination. A sixth way the verb seize gets used can mean to become stuck or jammed. And this definition is most commonly going to be used in connection with machines. So some part becomes stuck or jammed and isn't able to continue operating. For now, you should know that the verb seize is a regular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, we drop the E because our verb ends in the pattern vowel consonant E. After dropping the E, we add our ing, and that forms seizing. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding D, since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, seize, ends in a voiced sound. Z sounds are voice sounds in English, and this means that our ed ending is just going to make a D sound. So I'm not going to add an extra syllable as I say it. The past tense and the participle forms should sound like this: seized, seized. Now, I do have a few phrasal verbs for us to look at and discuss. The first phrasal verb we'll discuss is to seize on. This can be used a couple different ways. The first way you might hear it used is related to that idea of grabbing, grasping, or holding onto something intensely. right? So what this means, not like a loose, right? But you are really grabbing hold of something. An example of this: the child seized on her mother's arm throughout the roller coaster ride. Right? So here, maybe we're describing somebody who's a little frightened during an amusement park ride. So she's really holding on or grasping her mother's arm. A second way to use seize on can mean to accept, adopt, or undertake something with a great deal of enthusiasm. An example of this: the students seized on their teacher's suggestion to start their own podcast. Right? So it means they got excited about that idea. They started developing, maybe working on scripts, researching things, thinking about how they were going to present information or tell a particular story. A third way to use seize on means to resort to some sort of tactic or plan. Generally, it's out of desperation, which means you just, I don't think there's any other way, right? This is my only option, or out of necessity. An example of this: that person seizes on any reason to leave work early, right? So this is not a compliment. If we use a sentence like this, we're suggesting that someone is always kind of thinking, what could I use as an excuse to leave early? Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to seize up. This can mean that something is stopping working. And again, a little more common to hear it used in connection to machines, but somehow the parts can't move. They're not able to work. So an example of how you might hear this used: have the brakes seized up. This could be in connection to a bicycle or a car. Kind of terrifying or scary, that what this question is suggesting is maybe those aren't working. The last phrasal verb we'll discuss today is to seize with. When we use this phrasal verb, we're talking about using something in order to grasp, grab, or hold on to something. An example of this: the child seized the stuffed animal with the mechanical claw and tried to retrieve it. This sentence is describing something that can be found sometimes in arcades. So it's kind of a type of game where you try and move something, lower it, and grab on and bring something back. Right? So here they're using the mechanical claw in order to grab the stuffed animal. Now, let's continue using our verb of the day. Today, we're going to review the imperative and the present perfect. We're going to start with the imperative. Sometimes this word imperative sounds a bit new. It's a bit more technical in terms of grammar, but what we mean by it is a command. So when we give commands, we're telling someone to either do, in the positive, do something, or not do something. So we have no questions in the imperative. And the imperative is rather unique because we also do not have a stated subject. Many times you're used to being in the habit of starting your sentence with a person, maybe a place or a thing, a pronoun, right? We're not going to do that here. We can just begin our sentence with the base verb. And that's because our subject is implied, or it's understood to be you if I'm talking to one person, or you plural if I'm talking to two or more people. So an example how I've heard this verb, seize, used in the imperative has been in like movies and TV shows, particularly things that are a little bit older. You might see military, maybe police, again, command someone, seize them, right? So here they're wanting you to forcibly take control. Sometimes it's of the prisoner or someone who's accused of committing a crime. Now, if you want to use a negative imperative, so we're here telling someone not to do a particular action, you can start with do not and then the base verb, or you can use the contraction don't. So, an example of this: don't seize my bag without a warrant. Now, this would be a pretty strong command. And so if somebody is saying that to a police officer in the United States, mm, that officer is likely not going to react well to being told what to do or what they can or cannot do. So take caution with that, but it's still a good example. This idea of telling someone what to do or hear what not to do. Now let's move on and make some sentences in the present perfect. We use this verb tense in a couple different ways. We can use it to describe something that happened at an unknown point in the past. So just because we don't know exactly when, that might not be important. We just need to know that this action was completed at some point in the past. But we can also use the verb to talk about an action that started in the past and continues into the present. When we make sentences in the present perfect, we really do need to pay attention to our subject. If the subject is I, you, we, or they, you're going to use have, H-A-V-E, and then the participle form of the verb. And because seize is a regular verb, the participle looks exactly like the past tense. Now, if your subject is he, she, or it, use has, H-A-S, and then the participle form of the verb. Let's take a look at an example. Ukrainian forces have seized control of 482 square miles of Russian territory. Okay, so this is something started in the past, seems to be continuing, where they're still kind of trying to fight back, take back territory to put the military on the defensive, right? So that would be an example of why we're using the present perfect here. Now, if you want to make a negative present perfect sentence, again, start with your subject. Use have not and then the participle, or has not and then the participle form of the verb. You might also see have not combined into the contraction haven't, or has not combined into hasn't. Let's take a look at another example. That mechanism in the machine hasn't seized. So here it's still working. That's what's meant by that sentence. And finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the present perfect. To do this, start with have or has, then you're going to have your subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Have any novels or stories seized your attention recently? Right? So here, somebody's asking you to maybe share what's grabbed your attention, something you've wanted to continue reading on and on. Now, let's spend a moment talking about some words and phrases related to our verb seize. And the first word we're going to talk about today is the noun seizure. This noun can have a couple different meanings. We're going to talk about two of them today. The first way to use the noun seizure is to talk about that action of capturing something or confiscating, so taking legal possession of something or someone, and generally it's done using force. An example of this: 4 people were arrested during the drug seizure. That would be that confiscating, taking possession of the illegal drugs. A second way to use the noun seizure is to talk about a sudden attack of illness. It's really common to hear in connection with strokes or something that is sometimes described as an epileptic fit. Sorry, a little bit of a tongue twister there. So people can have medical conditions that might cause them to lose consciousness. So they're kind of and fall, kind of related to that. It might cause some sort of stiffness or some kind of uncontrollable movements, right? Where they're, I think sometimes it's described as kind of jerking. So that's what we're talking about there. So an example of this: the child has suffered from seizures her entire life. That's true. Some people have medical conditions, they can be helped with medication, but they still might have these sort of sudden attacks where they experience some uncomfortable symptoms. Another phrase you might encounter is to seize hold of. When people use this, they're again talking about forcibly taking and holding someone or something. And generally, we're using hands and arms. An example of this: he seized hold of his parents' hands as they walked into the school. Right? So maybe this is a new student, someone who's a little nervous on their first day, right? So forcibly going to grab. Another phrase you might encounter is seize the day. When people use this, they're encouraging someone to make the most out of that kind of present moment. An example of what you might hear somebody say: we're going to seize the day and spend as much time outside this weekend. So, depending on where you live, the weather might start getting a little cooler now. For some people, right, they want to make the most out of this really pleasant weather, pleasant period of time before winter sets in. Thanks again to Luis for suggesting today's verb, and thank you all so much for watching. Have a great day.